Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. How are you, Eric? Happy spring.
Yeah, we are heading into March and we've got some great spring weather in the Northeast. Hopefully, everybody else is warming up nicely.
Yep. And then we got daylight savings time this weekend, so it'll be light out till 7 o'clock or later out here on the East Coast, and it's and later on the farther west you move, which is pretty cool. So
Yes, and that has a huge effect on people. The difference in sunlight gives people a lot more energy. You can get a lot more done. You can relax more. You can work more, whatever is you want to do. Take advantage of that extra sunlight.
yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a good segue into what we're talking about today, because basically we're talking about a particular measurement.
Yes, we are. Today, we're going to be talking about the 212-degree principle. And for those of you not familiar with this is based on the boiling point of water in Fahrenheit, which at 211 degrees is just hot water. But at 212 degrees, just 1 degree difference, it turns to steam. And that steam can be used to power all sorts of things. And, you know, the Industrial Revolution was based on the steam engine, just to give you an idea of how much power is in steam. But the key that we're focusing on is the difference in 1 degree. And it's just doing that little extra to get so much more done. And that's something that everybody really needs to do on a daily basis. We've all heard the expression go the extra mile. Well, the fact is, over the past, I would say 20 years, going that extra mile has become rarer and rarer. Most people don't do it, most companies don't do it, and that extra mile has gotten a lot smaller. So now you don't even have to go that extra mile to get extraordinary results. It's the difference of 1 degree, and it's doing that little something. Now, that little something can be how you serve a customer, it could be how you take care of yourself. And we started actually talking about this over the last few weeks when we were talking about personal growth, when we were talking about differences in communication styles, because making that little change will have enormous results. In your health, it can be making a little change. You know, using health as an example, if you're looking to make a change in your diet, well, people will tell you, oh, you need to cut out sugar, you need to cut out carbs, you need to do this, you need to do that. Well, you don't need to do it all at once. You can make the little change. So instead of cutting out carbs, which, by the way, having been on a carb-free diet for a while, it is really difficult to cut out all carbs. And the fact of the matter is, you don't have to. Just cut down a little bit and then stay there for a week and then cut down a little more. The same works for exercise. You don't have to suddenly jump from doing no exercises to a full hour-long workout. Do a couple of stretches, exercise for 5 minutes, and do that every day for a week. Then take a little step, exercise for 10 minutes. These little steps, taken one at a time, make big strides. And of course, I'm talking about health, but the same thing goes for business. when you need to improve your processes, when you need to increase the quality of your product or service. Don't look for the massive change. Look for the incremental improvement that you can make and then see how that affects it.
Yeah, that's the exact same keyword that I was thinking of is incremental because it has to go step by step and you can't wave a magic wand and get from start to finish. So, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, and we talk about this all the time, it all starts with the person in the mirror. It starts with you and your own mindset, and you have to make up your mind that you're going to do just an incremental thing. You talked about diet, you talked about exercise and different things. We talked about the book called The Slight Edge, and that talks about if you're going to lose weight, you're not going to go out and run a marathon tomorrow and expect to lose 30 pounds. But if you can do a little bit of exercise every day, straighten out your diet a little bit, watch less television, and do some other motivational things, that's how you put this thing together. So, what you need to do is put together a little strategic plan for yourself, something that you can maintain, and just start doing it. That's what the extra degree is for. I mean, if you keep that water on the fire for an extra minute, it's going to go from 211 to 212, and you got to keep that fire lit underneath yourself to achieve the same thing to get from 211 to 212. But it all starts with self motivation, which we always talk about. Your self motivation should start with your own why. What's your passion and your purpose? What do you want to get done? But most importantly, why? And let that motivate you. Share what you want to do with others so that other people can ask you, how are things going? Get an accountability partner. But there's a whole lot of different things that you can do. And what I would do is just sit down and write down a few different steps that you can do and start implementing them. And away you go. And once you hit that 212 from 211, you have the momentum going, which there's nothing better to keep you going than to have that momentum.
Exactly. And when you're talking about motivation, it is a lot easier to be motivated to continue doing a small thing than it is a large change. So it's easier to stay motivated to keep a small change going. Again, using exercise as an example, it is so much easier to say, yes, I'm going to exercise for 5 minutes. And then the next day, go, yes, I'm going to do 5 minutes again. And the next day, I'm going to do 5 minutes again. Because by the third day, if you're trying to do an hour each day, by the third day, you're exhausted. It's like, oh, I just can't do an hour today. An hour is a big chunk where 5 minutes is not. The other advantage that a small change has is that you can see what happens. And it is easier to make a shift after a small change than it is a massive change. The fact is, most large changes have multiple steps. So, like, again, using exercise as an example, if you're doing an hour workout, you're doing a lot during that hour. Even if you're just walking or running or doing one exercise, you're doing it for an hour. So you don't know where the change is actually coming. Did you get the change after 5 minutes? Did you see a change after half an hour? When you jump to the hour, there's a lot of leeway there to where the change would be. In business, when you change a process, if you make a major change, usually you're changing several steps in the process. But by making an incremental change, you can employ the scientific method, which is theorize what that change is going to do, make the change, observe what actually happens, and see if the change is positive or negative. If it's positive, make another incremental change in that same direction. If it's negative, go back and figure out what other change you can make to get to your objective. But this allows you to take one change at a time. And by making incremental changes instead of large changes, you can generally avoid the impact of unforeseen circumstances. When you make a large change, the odds are you're not taking everything into consideration. And you can have events occur that you hadn't planned for. With an incremental change, that's less likely. So you can measure what you're doing. You can see the impact of what you're doing. Is it making your process more effective? Is it making it more efficient? Is it making it easier? Is it removing stress? These are all things that you can measure when you make an incremental change to a process, regardless of whether that process is for your business and your life. Whatever that process is, the incremental change allows you to measure it easily and see, is this actually effective in getting you closer to your goal? So the incremental change is not just more motivating. It incorporates getting you closer to your goal, making things more efficient, and evaluating what you're doing all on a simpler level than trying to make a large change.
Yeah. Basically, it's starting with your why, and then what are you trying to accomplish? Writing down your SMART goals to do that. And then it's so important, which we talked about last week, and we talked about your planner in which to do this, but track your progress. As I said, you're not going to go from point A to point B from 0 to 212 in one day, but you might go from 211 to 212 or 1 degree more. And if you are tracking your progress and writing things down, then you're number one, you're going to see the progress. And number two, you can start celebrating that on a day-to-day basis or week to week, however you're doing that, depending on whether you're physical or for business or whatever. And then celebrate what you're doing. If you have that down in front of you and you have what you're going to be doing, and if you want to do a little bit better, obviously you can adjust a little bit what your plan is. But if you have the whole thing down in writing and you're keeping a history as what's going on, that's going to help you stay motivated for doing what you're doing. Visuals are so important. I mean, as I've told you and everybody else, I mean, I use those all the time, and I'm, looking at all kinds of family pictures and looking out my backyard all the time just to keep me positive. And it's your choice to do that yourselves. So part of what you're doing when you're trying to accomplish this 212 degrees in whatever you're looking to do, whether it be physical or your job or so on and so forth, is to make sure you're doing that with your mindset also and keep it up there, realizing that you are going to have your down moments too, but you can always shift right back to that. And a little bit of success breeds more success.
And that right there is the key, that a little success breeds success. You don't have to take a giant innovative leap to be successful. And in fact, most giant leaps aren't actually giant leaps. They're little incremental steps. But of course, we don't always see all of the little steps. We see somebody coming, oh, I've just invented this major thing. But when you look at businesses traditionally, the big successes come not from a giant aha moment, but from the little steps figuring out how to achieve that aha moment. And the example that I like to use in business, and I actually had an argument with someone years ago over this, is I said that businesses are, there's no such thing as an overnight success. Overnight success takes a lot of time and a lot of these incremental steps. And this woman came back to me with, well, what about the chocolate chip cookie? This was created by accident and at the Toll House Cafe where they just threw a broken chocolate bar into a cookie dough, and voila, there was the chocolate chip cookie. And I said, yes, that was the final incremental step, was adding the chocolate chips. But could she have done that if she hadn't taken that first step and learned how to bake? The second step and created the original batter for the cookie that she ultimately threw the chocolate chips in. It was a lot of little steps that led to that aha.
Yeah, and I'm getting hungry now just thinking about it.
Right.
Actually, some people enjoy eating the dough as much or more than baking
Yes.
too, because that's, I mean, you can go out and buy a chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream, which is absolutely delicious. So, recipe for success. I mean, that's what you can think of. If you want to have a little bit of fun and get creative with yourself, what is your recipe for success in doing this? From getting up to 212 degrees to take you to boiling point. I mean, the steam train is just, I mean, that is one of the best examples ever because when you have water before it boils and you think about a train and all of a sudden you're pushing this many, many tons apparatus forward that changed the way that we did things in the world as far as transportation goes. It's really that simple. It's so amazing. I watched a documentary last night. It was either 125 or 150 years ago. The Eiffel Tower was built in the late 1800s, and the reason that they built it, the person who Eiffel himself, was to have something special in Paris to attract people when the Summer Olympics showed up. And how they went through the process of saying, do I make this out of cast iron or do I make this out of steel or whatever? And coming with the process as far as foundation because it's near water and so on and so forth. It's about a half an hour, 40-minute documentary that goes through the whole process. And they built that in like a year and a half or 2 years, and it was ready for the Paris Olympics. And when they were done with the Olympics, they wanted to make sure that they kept it. And they did things such as put an antenna on top of that for transportation and so on and so forth. And obviously, it's one of the biggest tourist attractions in the whole world. And it all started with an idea. And if you go through the process that Eiffel used to put this thing together with this team, it was just amazing. So, I mean, that's something, if you want to see something very motivational, I had, I knew that it happened very quickly, but going through how that happened, this is something I just watched last night before I even knew we were doing this today. And talk about hitting 212 in a hurry. It was just amazing. So that's something that will motivate you too. And that's one of the things that you can do to motivate yourself is go out and look at other success stories out there. You can go to the YouTube channel or YouTube TV and you can just take a look at a whole bunch of different things just by searching.
Yes, you can. And, if you think
And that's one
about
thing.
it, those incremental changes have actually created so much of our day-to-day lives. We've mentioned the steam engine, which of course revolutionized transportation. But even today, most electricity from coal-fired plants, from nuclear plants, from oil and gas powered plants still rely on steam to turn the turbine and create the electricity. And those little incremental changes. Now, think about it. We created steam by getting water 1 degree hotter. That steam can now turn a turbine to create electricity. That electricity now comes to your house to power a computer. Little steps. And I mean, take a look at the history of the home computer. The first home computer was actually called the Altair, and it had no keyboard, no monitor. You input data by flipping switches, and it gave you answers by flashing lights. And then someone went, well, how can we make this a little easier to use? And the first generally accepted computer that resembles what we use now was the Apple II, that had a monitor, had a keyboard, and it was all about, but the internals of it really weren't all that different. The chips were very similar, the internal processing power was very similar. It was just an incremental step to make it easier to use. And now we have phones in our pocket that, again, a lot of these smartphones run $1,000, even more. But when you think about it, the UNIVAC actually cost $1 million if you wanted to buy one, took up an entire room in a business, and couldn't do what your smartphone does. Now, we didn't get there in one great leap. We got there incrementally. So there's all of these current things that we have that we got to one step at a time. We think of them as great innovations. Sending a man to the moon in the 1960s was not, despite what Neil Armstrong says, was not one giant step. It was, well, how do we get something into orbit? How do we get it to orbit the Earth? How do we get it from the Earth to the moon? How do we get it to land on the moon? How do we get it to take off from the moon to come back? It was, and we've talked about this a lot, how you need to break your projects into smaller pieces so they're easier to do. The 212 principle shows the power of those incremental steps and how you can do so much more taking little step by little step than you can trying to take a giant leap.
Yep. And all the major successes that we've seen technologically in this world started with one small step, and they just kept going and going and going. That was a process that took maybe 10 years from when we just went up in this space and came down, and 10 years later we were walking on the moon. It was unbelievable. And I remember living from the 50s into the 60s and watching the whole space program go. It was just amazing. I was glued to my television in 69 when that happened. But it's just amazing what can happen step by step. But that's the way that it has to happen. Again, there is no magic wand out there that is going to get the job done. So if you get to that, and if you celebrate every step and you adjust along the way, if you have a team of people helping you out or motivating you and so on and so forth, if you're trying to accomplish things individually, it's just so important. So that's the way to do it. It's the only way to do it.
And the other really important part of this is to keep taking the steps. That's one of the reasons that an incremental step is so important, because it's easier to keep taking an incremental step than it is to make giant leaps over and over again. It does keep you motivated, but just in the past few weeks, we actually saw what happens when you stop taking those incremental steps. And of course, I am talking about the moon landing, because we kept taking steps. 1969, we got to the moon. We kept taking incremental steps, improving little by little until 1972. And in 1972, we stopped making those steps. And what happened? We haven't been back to the moon until last week, when a commercial lander, not even a manned rocket, but an automated commercial lander, finally returned to the moon. And this was because people looked at the incremental steps and they went, well, it's not exciting enough. But you know what? You're not doing this to create excitement. You're actually doing this to get things done, to accomplish more, to reduce your stress in trying to achieve your goals. None of that is going to garner great attention. And if that's why you're doing it, you've just increased your chances of failure. But taking those incremental steps, one after the other, it's that final step that makes the excitement. When you suddenly see where you've gotten to from where you started. And if you think about it, it was less than 100 years. Now we know 100 years sounds like a long time, but think about the progress that was needed to go in under 100 years from the Wright brothers getting an airplane off the ground for 8 minutes to landing on the moon. In that same 100 years, we went from manual mechanical calculators to smartphones with incredibly powerful computers. And again, we didn't do it all at once. We did it step by step, making incremental progress. It was, how can we make this a little bit better? And now, how can we make it a little bit better from there? And so on and so on. And huge progress came from those little steps. And this is not a new concept. It goes all the way back to ancient Chinese wisdom. And we're all familiar with the old saying, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. This is about taking that single step and then taking another and another. And the power of each of those steps is incredible. So we are just about at the end of our time. And we've done this step by step, taking you through how to achieve your goals with these incremental steps. But Chip, what is the one incremental step that our listeners should take away from this week?
Well, take that first step and then take the next step. It really helps to have a plan to start out with as far as what is your passion, your purpose, and your why, and what your goals are, what your plan is step by step, tracking your progress and celebrating when you get done. And again, we talked about all the tools that you have out there to keep yourself motivated. Go online, go to YouTube and research successes in different areas, including the one that you're looking to do. And they're there. Don't do it alone. Have a team with you as far as supporting you that you can talk with. It's so important to do that. But again, it is just step by step. Guide that with positivity and watch the magic happen.
Yes, the 212 principle shows the power of a single step. But that power is actually contained when you make your goals, when you create the plan with these incremental steps, and you take those incremental steps consistently. Something else that we talked about just a few weeks ago is the power of consistency and doing those steps over and over and over to get you where you want to go. And again, it is so much easier to stay motivated to make a little change, evaluate what's happening, and then make another change than it is to take a giant leap and then figure out what happened and did it work. So make it easier on yourself by making these incremental steps. Use the power of the 212 principle, and you can do amazing things. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.